The Jared Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. If you want to call to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. Got to take out my Zyn. It's kind of hard to talk with a Zyn sometimes. First of all, let me just say I love capitalism. And how do I want to phrase this? Capitalism isn't bad just because you suck at it, okay? If you're bad at capitalism, it doesn't mean that capitalism is bad and we should replace it with something else, okay? It means that life is a competition. Everything is a competition, okay? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I've lost plenty in my life. It may not seem that way, but I have lost a lot. So, anyway, if you rewind back to March, when the pandemic first hit, what was everybody talking about? Well, they were talking about masks. Now, everybody's opinion has changed on masks since then, and, there's been a lot of evidence that the pandemic is going to do whatever it does, regardless of whether people wear masks or not. I'm not anti-mask. If the law is that I have to wear a mask, or not the law, but if I have to, wear a mask inside a restaurant, then I put it on. I don't really want to rock the boat. It's just etiquette. Okay, it's just etiquette. But back in March of last year, the thing that we were hearing about all the time, and people were saying, we're not going to have enough masks. Like, there's 300 million people in this country. We just simply do not have enough masks. And at the time, I wrote my 10th Man newsletter, I said, don't worry. We are going to have plenty of masks. And that's what happened. In fact, now we have billions and billions of masks, and they're in the trash, and they're in the ocean, and they're everywhere, and we have too many. So that's what happens. Because if people think they can make money by producing masks, then they're going to produce masks. There was a demand for it. We needed millions of them. And look, I don't know who the mask companies are. I don't know who makes this stuff. Probably medical device manufacturers or something like that. And the profit margin on masks is probably pretty low, but when you sell billions of them, that's a pretty good business. Somebody, probably multiple people, got stupidly rich off of masks, and they're buying a house in Malibu as we speak. Okay. And why did they get rich? Because, capitalism often requires people to move fast. Okay. And that's a very underappreciated aspect of Amazon. It's just not that Amazon did what it was supposed to do well. It's that it did its job fast. It moved very fast and expanded very quickly into all different kinds of markets. The company is only 25 years old, and it does all these things. It moved very fast. Okay. And we were running out of toilet paper. People didn't have TP for their bunghole. Okay. So we're like, where are we going to get toilet paper? If there's a demand for toilet paper, we're going to make toilet paper. So now we have enough toilet paper. There was a lag. There was a period of time, maybe a month, where we had shortages, but it really didn't last long, And also, if you remember from the beginning of the pandemic, really it was hitting New York really hard, and there was thousands of people dying, and they were in freezer trucks out in the street. And you heard about these stories from the hospitals where they didn't have enough ventilators. And Andrew Cuomo was donating his ventilators. And, we have enough ventilators. We have enough masks. We have enough TP. We have enough ventilators because of capitalism. Now, can you imagine if there was a mask czar or a TP czar or ventilator czar sitting somewhere in an air-conditioned office in Washington, D.C., trying to direct the activities of thousands of people? It just, central planning does not work. We got everything we needed, and we got it because of the miracle of the markets. The free market did its job. And if you think about the magic of this, The thousands of people involved that don't even know each other, complete strangers, each working for their own benefit, from the people who harvested the cotton to make the masks, to the people who make the rubber for the elastic bands, to the manufacturers who assembled the masks, to the trees that were cut down to make the cardboard boxes that they were shipped in, to the automakers that built the trucks that drove them, to the oil companies that drilled for the oil that was refined into gasoline for the trucks. This required the coordination and orchestration of millions of people, and nobody planned it. All of it was done on time. Within a few weeks, everybody had masks, and nobody planned it. There was no person in Washington, D.C. directing all this activity from a desk. The miracle of capitalism. So if you ever find that markets are not functioning, it's usually because there is some sort of human intervention, okay? And whenever you find that you have an economic disaster, like Cuba, for example, okay? Cuba is an economic disaster. It's not a natural disaster. It didn't happen exogenously. There wasn't an earthquake. There wasn't a volcano. It was a man-made disaster. It was caused by themselves. Economic disasters are all man-made, and it's because of people's screwed up ideology. You know, when you talk about people intervening in the markets and these unintended consequences, the best example of this of all time was back in 2008. You know, the SEC banned short selling in financial stocks during the financial crisis because it was these evil short sellers that were shorting these bank stocks, and they were putting these banks out of business. So if we just ban short selling, then companies will stay in business. You know, it created all kinds of problems because you have market makers and options that need to be able to short the stocks to hedge the options, and people who own convertible bonds to be able to short stock to hedge the bonds. It totally destroyed the stock market, and the bank stocks went to zero anyway. It didn't prevent anything bad from happening. It just caused all these other kinds of problems. And this is very linear thinking, okay? People they're like, okay, the bank stocks are going down, so let's just ban short selling. You know, this is not well thought out, okay? I don't know what it takes. I don't know. You have to read some Bastiat, or, you know, you have to understand that anytime you intervene in a system that is very complex, you are bound to cause consequences that are unintended. The idea of naive intervention, that's what that is. I was actually going to write a book about this back like 7 years ago, and I wrote up a proposal, and it was a mess. It's one of these books. I just wasn't smart enough to write it. It's too big of a topic for me. I'm just not sophisticated enough. So, it's actually not a matter of being smart enough. It's a matter of being disciplined enough, and I'm just not disciplined enough. But this is called, I call this Costanza from the Seinfeld episode, where George Costanza finds that if he does the opposite of what his instincts tell him to, life is better. Okay? For example, ban short selling, stocks go down, right? An economy is an endlessly complex, interconnected system, and if you mess with one part of it, it screws the whole thing up. So one of my partners in this radio business, he told me a story. He traveled to the Soviet Union. This was back in the 1980s. This is before the Berlin Wall came down. And he went to a farm. So he's looking around the farm, and there's like 40 big pieces of farm equipment, like harvesters, scattered all around the farm, and they're just sitting there rusting. And he says, what's with all the harvesters? Well, this was communism, and there was no mask czar, but there was a farm czar. And the people on the farm, they had these harvesters that kept breaking. There was a part that they would fail, and they would try to order the part, but they couldn't get the part, so they would just order a new harvester, and they kept doing this over and over again. The colossal waste, fraud, and abuse that's involved in a centrally planned economy is unthinkable. Okay? It's a command and control system. We have this idea. It's really like this utopian idea that there is some omniscient bureaucrat who knows exactly what everyone needs, how much it costs, and in what time. This is why central planning does not work. It didn't work when Russia did it, and it doesn't work when the United States do it. And we try to do it all the time. And what you end up with are chronic shortages, waste, fraud, and abuse. I do not have the statistics in front of me. Maybe Cato does, something like that. Capitalism has raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the world in the last 20 years. Global poverty has declined dramatically. It's because of capitalism. Thousands of people are lifted out of poverty every single day. It also results in billionaires, for sure. That's a good thing. We've talked about that on this show before. If you have a problem with somebody making a lot of money, that's a you thing. What we practice here in the United States isn't always capitalism because we subsidize certain industries, we tax others, we have tariffs and quotas. It's actually gotten worse over time. And we don't really have a capitalist economy. We don't have a communist economy. We have a mixed economy. But it is still a fundamentally capitalist country that functions on market signals. And if you mess with things long enough, market signals stop working, and that's when you have problems. Prices are signals. If the price of something is high, it sends a signal. It is telling producers to produce more and for consumers to consume less. If the price of something is low, it is telling producers to produce less and for consumers to consume more. And if prices aren't allowed to fluctuate, then the signals don't work and the economy ceases to function. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.